The pie isn't getting bigger, but the slices are about to. Is this the next evolution in college football?
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this sport we love has gone through a lot of changes in recent years. NIL, unlimited transfers. We're about to take a step even farther, my friends, as the antitrust lawsuit, House versus the NCAA, might be about to cause a settlement that is going to shatter the framework of college football. We are Locked On ACC. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. He is Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On ACC your first listen, your first watch each and every day. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. You know, Kenton, I feel bad, and you played major college football, right? So maybe you're going to get a piece of this, okay? And you should get a piece of this because I feel bad for former players who, played before the days of NIL and obviously before the days of revenue sharing, which hasn't happened yet. But a part of a settlement that's already being discussed between the plaintiffs and defendants, the defendant being the NCAA here in this antitrust lawsuit, House versus the NCAA, a settlement that's being negotiated would involve not only payments to past players who would be determined to be owed money for services rendered in the past, but a revenue sharing model for current and future NCAA athletes, Kenton. And an interesting thing about this is I don't know how much this proposal might evolve or even if this settlement ever happens. We're probably in the early stages of this, but the amount of revenue to be distributed by every school to student athletes, it would not be different based on how much revenue that school pulls in. We're talking about 15 to 20 million for every school, same amount. So Boston College would have the same 20 million to distribute as Ohio State, which was the top revenue athletic program this past year. So, but first things first, I don't know how they'd split this money up among student athletes, but every student athlete would get a piece of that 20 million.
Yeah, and let me start off by saying this, right? I'm not one of the old guys that's screaming at the clouds and saying back in my day. If I get a good settlement out of this, great. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna lie and say, hey, I'm not, I couldn't use some extra cash right now. But with that being said, going forward, these players getting paid as part of a revenue sharing model based on what they're bringing in, I'm all for it. The time is long overdue. The highest paid state employees in almost every state are who, Donno? College basketball and football coaches.
Yeah.
So with that being said, with all due respect, Dabo Swinney walked away or will walk away with his body still intact. I know we're all talking about I believe it's the Orlando Magic's coach, tore his patella tendon the other day. And everybody's like, oh my God, an injury for a coach. How is this going to react? I know that we saw the 1 in a billion coach injury, but the reality is every guy I played with, I mean, if I was just to talk about the defensive line room that I played with, a vast majority of those guys, something is wrong with almost all of us. I personally had 2 Achilles tears and a bicep tear. So one of my other very good teammates, he said something that all of us laughed at because we could all relate to. And he was like, hey, am I the only one that has to put a pin wherever I park my car? Because I can't remember. And like all of us were like, wait, what? None of us can do that? But it's the reality of football. So we know what we're signing up for, but it's good to now see players getting compensated to a higher level for that. Because the reality is everybody talks about, the majority of you won't go pro. I strongly disagree. I think if you made it to the Power 4 level, you're already a pro. Let's just be honest. This is not an amateur undertaking. Dr. Pepper is not sponsoring your rec league basketball. I'm sorry to tell you this, but the reality is there is no Tostitos pickleball bowl at your local Lifetime Fitness. That's the reality, right? So I very much so am not against this moving towards a more professional model. And the last thing I'll say is this. A lot of people will say, well, if they move towards a professional model, then coaches should be able to cut players. Why do y'all think that doesn't already happen?
Right. It does happen for sure.
Go look at rosters from one year to the next when a team wins less than 5 games. I challenge you to tell me what the turnover looks like on those teams in comparison to winning teams. And I double dog dare you to ask yourself the question. Think critically for a second. If those players are not good, and some of those players are aware of the fact that they're not good, and they enter the portal, or before there was the portal, they transferred out to JUCOs or D2s or wherever to go to Island of Misfit Toys University from a Power 4 or Power 5 at that time, why do you think that happened? Let's just put 2 and 2 together. So I'm going to kick it to you after that, but I'm just saying we're already in a professional sport, more or less.
Well, so let me ask you this, because we like to tie everything back to the Atlantic Coast Conference. And I brought up the point that based on the details that have been reported about a possible settlement, again, we're not there yet. We might get there, because if they don't settle, they would be on the hook for a lot more money than if they do settle, potentially, right, in terms of back pay. So there is some motivation, I think, here to settle. With every institution having the same amount of revenue to split, like I mentioned, and I didn't mean to pick on Boston College. I just used them as the example that Boston College would have, the same 15 to 20 million that Ohio State would have from this from this future revenue sharing model. Kenton, does that levels the playing field at least a little bit, right? Like when we talk about how the ACC and the Big 12 are falling behind the Power 2 that is the SEC and the Big 10. Obviously, that doesn't bridge the gap in terms of the TV deals and the revenue comes from that. But if you're talking about revenue sharing, and every university gets the same 15 to 20 million to spread to their student athletes, that seemingly does level that playing field of Power 2 versus the others, in my eyes.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In terms of having a flat number that everybody shares, there's no way that doesn't level the playing field to some degree. Now, the question is to what degree does it level it, but there's no argument for whether or not it levels it, because the reality is, if we, not to pick on Boston College, we could go somewhere else with it. We could talk about Wake Forest. That's one of the smaller brands in college football, right? But the reality is, if you're now infusing Wake Forest with $20 million a year to spend on roster management, to spend on facility upgrades, to spend on however they decide to spend it, even if we're saying that this is all revenue sharing and this is all going to your roster, do you not imagine that it will be a little bit easier for guys to kind of work it out to where, why would I sit and be the third, fourth guy at Texas and I have to take third, fourth guy money, as opposed to going to Wake Forest and being the starter right now, and I get not the same amount in terms of NIL and all that, because that's never going to be equal as long as there's no, regulation limiting the amount. But in terms of just base pay, we're getting paid the same amount. Give me that starter money, baby. I need that first string money. Don't you talk to me about no sit here for 3 years and you'll go to the league eventually. If we're talking about my cut, you think about 20 million divided amongst 85 scholarship players, you're looking at a pretty healthy chunk of change there. So I could absolutely see this leveling the playing field to some extent. Now, again, the question is, does it bring the kind of 2 that are lagging behind in terms of the ACC and Big 12 even with the SEC and Big 10? Absolutely not. But how close does it bring them is the question. And I think it brings them fairly close. I think it does a lot to close the gap.
Yeah, and we'll give you more reasons why this makes sense, and also why a settlement makes sense rather than letting a jury decide this. Also, on this episode of Locked On ACC, I want Kenton and I to go through some bold predictions on the league, because, certain schools we've given a lot of attention to as of late. Florida State, Miami has been very active in the transfer portal. We've talked a lot about Louisville because they've had a very hot topic transfer portal as of late. But I think some other teams might be involved on our bold predictions and hot takes coming up. So you know what you want to do? We're only getting started. You want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Oh, my friends, I know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel because we're making money and we're having a blast with all the action we're getting during these postseason runs. Yeah, it's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. It's winner take all time, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. We've been talking, folks, about those over-unders for ACC win totals. Florida State, Clemson, Miami at 8.5. NC State, or those are 9.5, actually. NC State and Louisville are 8.5. Take advantage of these opportunities. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. I'm Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. He's Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. All right, so Kenton, as I'm reading about this potential settlement over the last couple of days, I thought Yahoo Sports did a really good job putting it in layman's terms, in terms of a little less legalese than some of the other outlets have been writing up. And they say, why settle? Like, what is the motivation to settle? And this is a great point brought up. The settlement would offer the NCAA and power leagues protection from future lawsuits for a stretch of time, likely in the range of 8 to 10 years. Those briefed on the matter say this is essential as the NCAA has lost virtually every antitrust case brought against it, most notably the Supreme Court's 2021 decision in the Alston case over educationally related benefits to athletes. Number two, the settlement is expected to include other active cases such as the Hubbard and Carter lawsuits, both brought against the NCAA and power leagues by the same attorney, Jeffrey Kessler, who is leading the House plaintiff legal team. In short, the Hubbard case seeks back compensation stemming from the Alston Supreme Court decision, and Carter is seeking to eliminate all NCAA rules prohibiting athlete compensation. Can the settlement kill three proverbial birds with one stone? Perhaps. And then number three, any settlement avoids a much steeper price tag. If the NCAA and power leagues decide to challenge the case in court and lose, damages owed to athletes are tripled, and that's because it's an antitrust case. A price of $1 to $2 billion could turn to $4.26 billion in a hurry. So that seems like a lot of reasons why they would want to settle this thing, and why, Kenton, it's unavoidable to me. Now, I know other solutions that aren't involving the NCAA have been brought up, like the College Football Super League, which would cut the NCAA out. But it seems like reaching a settlement could also be something that maybe ensures the NCAA's survival. Because if they go to court and lose, then maybe the NCAA gets cut out completely.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We're, as Dr. Strange said in Infinity War, we're in the end game now. That's what we're looking at here. The NCAA is on the run trying to cover its hide and absolutely scrapping and clawing for any bit, like you said, of survival. But that's just where we are. That's where we are. When you talk about why settle, you have had the wheels whooped off of you again and again and time again. The question for me is, if I'm the other side, why would I accept the settlement? Because the pressure that's being applied is, it's like if somebody said, hey, we have a situation where we're betting money that Donno is going to block Max Crosby for a game-winning play here, and they're like, and Locked On is like, well, we got Donno, but I guess we could try to hedge our bet here and cut out. Why would they let you hedge? Like, why would they let you say, hey, let's cut out at this point? No, you stay in this bet. But very seriously, it's one of those moments that the NCAA is absolutely fighting for its survival, and I can see the parties settling, because that is a lot of money. Let's not play around like $2 billion is a joke amount of money. So with that being said, I could absolutely see these settlements happening. But again, the NCAA needs to be praying and hoping and wishing whatever deities they worship or believe in over there, they need to be going and getting to talking to them right away, saying, please let these folks accept this settlement, because honestly and truly, there's very little incentive for the other side to accept that settlement, as opposed to there's an entire world worth of reasons for the NCAA to push for a settlement.
Now, here's the last thing I want to bring up on this before we talk some ACC football. I talked about this maybe leveling the playing field ever so slightly from, the lower tier Power 4 conferences like the ACC and the Big 12, because they get the same payouts that the SEC and the Big 10 schools get. Here's the issue some will bring up. but I don't know how much weight these arguments will have. This actually would widen the gap, Kenton, between the Power Four and the Group of Five, because the Group of Five would theoretically not be included in this settlement because most of their programs do not generate revenue. So the thing is, obviously, most Power Four programs do. Most Group of Five don't. So when we're talking about 15 to 20 million per school, that's only in Power Four schools. Group of Five, from what I understand, would be left out in the cold here.
And I hate to say this, I hate to be this guy, right? Because I'm sure on Locked On Big Ten and Locked On SEC, they've had similar moments where they talk about the ACC in this way. Tough titty said the kitty when the milk went dry. I can't really, there's not too much that I can say here for the Group of Five teams in terms of like, hey, this will be a great thing for you all too, or this won't widen the gap in that regard. I know that this is a little bit of a rich get richer situation, but again, even amongst the rich, there's a delineation if we're talking about this. And if we're talking specifically from an ACC standpoint, you happen to be, even if you're on the lower end, on the side of the rich who are getting richer. So, it is unfortunate if you're a Sun Belt team, if you're a MAC team, if you're an American Conference team, if you're a Mountain West team, it is unfortunate. I'm not going to lie and say, oh, well, this it's fair for you all and all that good stuff. It's not exactly fair that they don't end up getting anything out of this, because let's just be honest. I don't think that college football as it exists today happens without the Group of Five. However, I mean, it's just the world we live in that, the majority of the really big contracts and the majority of the eyes are being bought forth by Power Five Power Five or now Power Four teams.
I want to hear from you guys, the listeners and the viewers, any bold predictions you have or hot takes on the upcoming ACC college football season. Maybe you think that, all the new faces Miami brought in, maybe you think they're going to fall flat. Maybe you think Florida State is overrated, trying to follow up on their ACC championship. Maybe you think that Dabo Swinney's 1990s approach to roster building is not going to work in today's game. We would love to hear from you guys in the comments below. Kenton and I are going to talk potential bold predictions when we come back. We are not done yet, my friends. You want to keep it locked right here on Locked On ACC. I've been having a blast playing Monopoly Go. I get a little addicted to this app. It's my wife is like, "What are you doing on your phone?" Well, I'm smashing people's properties with wrecking balls. What do you think I'm doing on Monopoly Go? You can team up with your friends, by the way. It's not only trolling your friends. In Monopoly Go, you can team up for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or robot pinko machines. And there's always new timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. By the way, we're going to introduce the new Locked On Clemson host on tomorrow's episode. So, for any hot takes we may have about Dabo Swinney and Cade Klubnik, we're going to get the Clemson side of that on tomorrow's episode. But Kenton, one thing, and I'm going to say, and a lot of this is based on the information we got from Pac-12 expert, may the Pac-12 rest in peace, Spencer McLaughlin on yesterday's episode, who's now the host of Locked On College Football. I had been sleeping on Cal. East Coast bias, call it whatever you want. I don't think Cal's going to win the conference, but Kenton, I think Cal is going to be the most successful of those three new teams, where SMU has been the sexy pick, Cal flying under the radar. And a big reason why I like Cal so much, a relatively experienced roster, and Jaden Ott in their backfield. That dude is a stud. I mean, I've been hyping up Damian Martinez for the last, several days since he committed to Miami. He ran for 1,185 yards. Jaden Odd at Cal played in the same conference, rushed for 1,300 freaking yards last year. Cal is not going to be a pushover, and every team that has to play them on the road has to fly all the way across the country. Obviously, they have to do the same when they play on the East, but I am not sleeping on Cal anymore. Oh, you're muted.
They're going to surprise some people this year. That's the big media trying to stop me from getting the word out that Cal is absolutely going to surprise.
That's the SMU controlled Dallas area. Doesn't want.
There you go. The Dallas dark money is taking my voice out from under me. But in all seriousness, they're going to surprise some people this year. There are going to be some upsets where I think they're going to be double-digit dogs and pull off one or two upsets this year. Because again, I think that the perception around them is different from the reality. And when you look at Cal, there is not much there historically, especially in recent history, to say like, oh, that's going to be a team that's going to have success and do well. However, Odd is one of the best backs in the country, at least one of the more underrated backs. I don't think that can be argued by any stretch of the imagination. And it actually ties in to my hot take here, because my hot take, my bold prediction for the 2024 football season, the backs are back. This will be one of the first times in recent history that we see the top 5 players in terms of ACC Player of the Year voting dominated by running backs. I have no doubt in my mind that there will be at least 3 of the top 5 will be running backs. You look around this conference, how many teams do we have questions about their quarterback? Very deep and very meaningful questions about their quarterback. Now, look at those teams' backfield. You look at, let's talk about it, right? North Carolina. Well, we're not sure about Max Johnson. We don't know what he is, but you know who you do know is back there? Hampton. He was one of the leading rushers last year.
Yeah, he rushed for over 1,300 yards last year.
Exactly. You look at Cal. The quarterback was a freshman last year. What does the sophomore year look like? How high is he going to jump? That's your answer. You look at so many teams around this conference, and you constantly have to say, man, the running back's going to have to carry. I know we're going to have Locked On Clemson's host tomorrow. I don't believe that Clemson wins double-digit games if Phil Maffa doesn't get 1,300 yards. I don't believe that. I think that they would struggle mightily to get to double-digit wins if he's only a 800-yard rusher again, if he's only a 900-yard rusher, because I don't believe in their passing game, and I don't believe in the depth that they have in that backfield to say like, oh, there's a star that's coming out immediately. So I think that this year we're going to see massive jumps by some of these backs, and I think that we're going to see the most run-heavy ACC that we have seen since Paul Johnson had the rambling wreck down there running the triple option.
And another example of that, I think, because, I don't know who they might still add in the portal, but with there being some questions about the potency of Florida State's passing offense, Toafili, Roydell Williams, I think Florida State has a very strong backfield for any questions people might have about the quarterback receiver connections they're going to have after, losing Jordan Travis and losing Wilson and Coleman at wideout. I think their running game is going to be just fine, and that could be something that carries Florida State.
Absolutely. And when you talk about Florida State, you're talking about one of the best teams in the conference, and you're saying to yourself, how are they going to sustain and survive if the running game doesn't get it done? But that is a constant strain throughout so many teams in the conference. If Louisville doesn't have a good runner, are you trusting Tyler Shough to not be a quarterback that you win with? You have to win because of him. He has to go out and win you the game every time. No. So Louisville is going to have to find a way to run the ball. We've talked about Cam Ward and Damian Martinez and how he's going to need to lighten the load. Martinez is going to need to lighten the load for Cam Ward. But again, even if you keep going up the coast, you're going to find guys again and again and again that the reality is, if they are not at least good or better, serviceable ain't going to do for some of these teams. You have to be good or better in the backfield for multiple teams in the ACC, or else your season's going to go in the crapper because, objectively speaking, there are two things that travel: defense and running the football. Regardless of what the weather is, regardless of what the terrain is like, regardless if you got the jet lag of flying to Cali or the jet lag from flying to Boston College from Cali, that is something that is going to travel. So, I really and truly think that, again, these running games in the ACC, we're going to see a resurgence. We're going to see a bunch of 1,000-yard rushers this year because there are a lot of bell cows in the ACC.
Yeah, another a bold prediction I'm going to make, because again, so many of the teams that are expected to be really good in the ACC are teams that are probably going to be carried by their defenses. Now, I think for a team like Miami, it could be the opposite, but most of these top teams will be carried by their defenses. This is a team that will not play in the conference championship game, but I think Georgia Tech might end up with a top 3 offense in the ACC, Kenton. I mean, first of all, Haynes King didn't put up gaudy numbers in that offense, but he put up good numbers for the Yellow Jackets last season. I think he's going to do even better this year. Completed 62% of his passes, 2,842 passing yards, threw for 27 touchdowns. Now, the interception number was way too high. He's got to get that down. But when you talk about the Hayneses in that, the plural in that offense, from Haynes King, the quarterback, and Jamal Haynes, you talk about the year of the back. That's a guy who rushed for over 1,000 yards last year. They added a couple tight ends in the transfer portal. They have some good wideouts there at Georgia Tech. This is not a team that I think is going to surprise anyone to the point where they win the conference. But my bold prediction on Georgia Tech is I think they can have one of the top 3 offenses in that conference.
Absolutely. Key loves to get physical. That's why he went and got those tight ends. Yes, Haynes King is that gunslinger. Yes, he's going to throw you into some games. He's going to throw you out of some games. You know how you stop a guy like that from throwing you out of games? You take the ball out of his hands. That's not a disrespect to him. But again, if you're talking about a guy whose turnover numbers are too high, where it's really hard for quarterbacks to turn the ball over? Hand the ball off here. Hand the ball off here. It gets really hard for you to turn over the ball like that. So I absolutely agree with you there in terms of Georgia Tech potentially being a surprise team here. And I'm going to let off a hot take that some people are not going to like, but it needs to be said anyway, okay? Again, I hate to feel like I'm dogpiling on this team, and many people are going to feel like it, but it has to be said. A lot of people talk about Virginia Tech and what they got going on. I'm going to drop a hot take for UVA. If Tony Calandria is not their starting quarterback, they do not win more than 4 games this season. Yeah. If they decide to go with Tony Muskett, if they decide to go any other direction, I am guaranteeing you, this is me guaranteeing you, that the Who's will not win more than 4 games this season, and Tony Elliott's time as head coach there will be done. That's just the reality. I think that Tony is that special, and I think he covered up. While people talk about his turnover numbers as well, that was a true freshman on a team that outside of Malik Washington, what weapons do you think of from UVA? What weapons do you think will be playing on Sunday at any point in time from there?
Maybe if they organize a Sunday church league, maybe they'll be playing on Sunday.
And that's my point exactly. While he did have some moments of immaturity and some moments where you just kind of you sat there and said, yeah, he is a freshman. He's a year older. He's got the goods. He's got something that you can tell the team's energy changes when he enters the game. I understand Muskett was the proven product. He was the stable product. He was the one that's not going to lose you the game. Virginia doesn't need that. Y'all don't have that type of team where it's like, don't lose us the game, we'll be fine. No, you need a playmaker at the quarterback position. Tony Calandria is the only shot you got to save your job, Tony Elliott. Listen to me now. The Tony connection needs to go through Tony Calandria.
You brought up something that I want to expand on more in a future episode. Maybe on Friday we could talk about this, because remember we're talking Clemson tomorrow on Locked On ACC. But I want to explore like how many teams in the ACC actually have competitions for their starting quarterback job this coming year, because most of them seem set. I mean, I'm sure that there's some that I'm overlooking, but when I run through this in my brain, the majority of the teams that I can think of, you have a good idea who their starting quarterback, barring injury, or you have a good idea who their starting quarterback is going to be in this year. So that's something I want to explore on a future episode. But we will be introducing our new Locked On Clemson host tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. Kenton Gibbs always does a fantastic job. Make sure you follow him at TGIF_Kenton. Check out Locked On Wolfpack. You can check me out also on Locked On Canes. Follow me on X at Alex Donno, and we will talk to everyone next time on another episode of Locked On ACC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.